Introducing me. So yes, my name is Jennifer. I'm the dietitian at CanMed Weight Management Clinics. So the topic of today's presentation is, does one diet fit all? And I think Dr. Mehta did a very good job of, creating a preface for my presentation. So I'm going to be sifting through evidence behind various diets and dietary patterns. So the objectives include to discuss evidence behind various diets and dietary patterns for weight loss and long-term weight maintenance, to discuss a holistic and well-rounded approach to weight loss and long-term weight maintenance, and to inform about the integral role of a dietitian in the weight management team. So some statistics. According to the Canadian Community Health Survey in 2018, 27% of Canadians age 18 and older were classified as obese, and 36% adults were classified as overweight. The proportion of men being obese and overweight was higher compared to females. So,
BMI 20, greater than 26 is overweight.
Yes.
Greater than 30 is obese.
Yes.
So how many Canadians are obese, greater than 30?
I believe it was 7 million, if I'm not mistaken. I don't have the number memorized, but yeah. So now I'll talk about the dietary patterns. So the first one is Mediterranean dietary pattern. I'm sure a lot of us are very familiar with this dietary pattern. It is well-documented dietary pattern. So as you can see, the Mediterranean diet pyramid, it emphasizes a lot on whole foods, whole plant-based foods such as fruits and vegetables, whole grains, starchy vegetables. Also, the olive oil is the main healthy fat that is promoted. The other thing is it also promotes eating oily fish like salmon, trout. Frequent but moderate intake of wine is recommended with meals, as well as moderate intake of dairy, cheese, and poultry is recommended according to this diet, and then a low intake of red meat and processed meats. And it also emphasizes a lot on eating seasonal foods as well as freshly prepared home-cooked meals. So I just wanted to talk about a study that was done, published in New England Journal of Medicine. So in this study, Mediterranean diet that was calorie restricted was compared with low-carb, non-calorie restricted diet and low-fat calorie restricted diet. So maximum weight loss occurred during 1 to 6 months, and then the weight loss was maintained from 7 to 24 months. So as you can see here, 2.9 kilograms in the low-fat group, because I know in the past, way past, we used to talk about low-fat diet for weight loss. But as you can see here, Mediterranean diet, the weight loss was about 4.4 kilograms, and which was very comparative to low-carb group, which was 4.7 kilogram weight loss. Additionally, all groups had significant decrease in waist circumference and blood pressure. However, there was no significant differences between the three groups. So other parameters like HDL and triglycerides, blood sugars, and inflammation were also positively impacted by the Mediterranean diet. So the mechanism by which Mediterranean diet can help with weight loss is as follows. So the high intake of plant-based foods, typically and healthy fats, indicate high intake of fiber as well as healthy fats from olive oil. So it increases satiety. The energy density of plant-based foods is also low, and it's also low glycemic index. Lastly, it has a lot of water, so all these factors increase satiety and decrease caloric intake. And then if you have a decreased caloric intake, then you're able to lose weight and maintain a caloric deficit. So some pros and limitations. So health benefits are well documented in research studies. It includes all food groups without any extremes. So it doesn't exclude starchy vegetables or carbohydrates from the diet. It focuses on eating seasonal and freshly cooked meals and bringing the family together during meal times. The only potential limitation could be it may be difficult to limit the intake of calorically dense healthy fats like olive oil, nuts, and seeds, especially for those struggling with disordered eating, heightened hunger hormones, and also are unable to manage portion sizes. So a plant-forward diet, it's very similar to Mediterranean diet. It also emphasizes on eating whole plant-based foods such as beans and lentils, smart carbohydrates such as whole grain cereals, fruits, vegetables. It also emphasizes on eating soy proteins such as tofu, edamame beans. So all of these things are really high in fiber. So it is pretty similar to Mediterranean diet. And I'm just going to talk about the evidence behind the weight loss for this. So a meta-analysis was done. The meta-analysis was 12 randomized controlled trials by Huang et al. And they found that the participants that were in any type of vegetarian diet lost 2 kilograms more weight compared to non-vegetarian diet. So 6 out of 12 studies also included the component of energy restriction with vegetarian diet versus non-energy restriction vegetarian diet. And they found that unsurprisingly, energy-restricted vegetarian diet led to 2.2 kilograms of weight loss versus 1.6 kilograms of weight loss in non-energy restricted vegetarian diet. They also did a sub-analysis and looked at what impact a vegan diet can have. And they found that participants who were following a vegan diet lost 2.5 kilograms versus participants who were following vegetarian diet. That was about 1.5 kilograms. Just another thing about plant-forward diet, and that's why I have the name plant-forward diet, because it doesn't recommend you to completely eliminate animal protein, dairy, cheese. What it recommends is addition of a lot of smart carbohydrates, a lot of healthy fats through nuts and seeds, fruits, vegetables, which certain types of diet recommend eliminating for weight loss. So it's all about addition and not giving up your favorite foods. So some pros and limitations for this diet include it's very cost-effective, improved heart health and diabetes management, improved lipid profile. So some research studies have shown that it's able to decrease hemoglobin A1C, decrease lipid profile, especially LDL cholesterol. And some of the limitations could be we need to monitor the adequate intake of protein. So if someone suddenly switches to plant-based diet who was an animal protein eater, there is a high chance that they're not getting enough protein if they were adequately getting protein from animal proteins before. But if they were overeating protein on non-vegetarian diet, then they probably will get enough. It's also very individualized, so it's important to monitor the intake of protein. Need to monitor micronutrient deficiencies, especially iron, B12, and a lot of patients who transition to complete vegan or vegetarian diet, they may eliminate fish. So especially oily fish that contains EPA, DHA, omega-3 fatty acids are important for heart health and brain health. So we have to make sure that they're getting the supplement form of omega-3 if they're following a strict vegetarian or vegan diet without fish. May not be favorable for those who completely dislike beans and lentils. So I have a lot of patients who, if I recommend them to eat plant-based or plant-forward diet, they'll tell me, I have texture aversion. I hate beans. There's only kidney beans I'll eat, but I won't eat any other beans. So it's very important for us to kind of understand that there is a limitation to this diet, and if we recommend that, openly without educating the patient might go back and try to figure it out on their own, but may not eat even animal protein or plant-based protein because they don't like plant-based protein. So we need to educate them what are some sources of plant-based proteins. So now let's talk about diets. So the other thing about plant-based protein is the mechanism by which it helps with weight loss is the plant-based foods have reduced energy density, and they are also low in fat. So that provides with increased satiety because of the high fiber intake, as well as increased postprandial energy expenditure. So the first diet, very popular. Can I get a raise of hands of how many people have tried keto diet? Okay, so not many people.
Family members have.
Okay, yeah, not you, but your family members.
If you can stick with it.
That's a good point there, right? So ketogenic diet, it's basically a diet that restricts carbohydrate to very minimum. So a true ketogenic diet only allows 5% of your daily caloric intake from carbohydrates, and that too from just non-starchy vegetables, 10% from protein, and 75 to 90% calorie needs are included through fat. So it allows saturated fat from butter, fatty meats, as well as unsaturated fats from nuts, seeds, avocados, oily fish, etc. So this is a study that was, so going back to how ketogenic diet works, so basically what it does, it puts your body in a pseudo-fasted state. So what happens is when you're not giving your body carbohydrates, like you just mentioned, it works. It definitely works, and there's a rapid weight loss at the beginning. Why? Because you're losing a lot of water weight in the beginning, and then you might plateau, or you will start to see fat loss, depending on how strictly you're following the ketogenic diet. So your body gets deprived of glucose, and then it switches to getting energy to feed your brain and tissues through fat. So when your body gets into ketosis, a lot of ketones are produced, which kind of crosses the blood-brain barrier and goes and feeds your brain energy, because your brain cannot use fatty acids as a source of energy. So the source of energy is then ketones. So hence your body goes in ketosis. But like you mentioned, you have to keep your body in ketosis for a long time for this diet to work. So now going to the evidence for weight loss. So this graph shows that weight loss results in a study conducted by Drishti Hussain et al. It was a 24-week study, 83 obese participants with BMI over 35, and high blood sugars and high cholesterol were selected. Body weight, BMI, blood pressure, blood glucose, hemoglobin A1C, lipids, creatinine, and urine were some of the parameters that were looked at. Like you said, I'm going to refer back to you, the weight and BMI decreased significantly. Blood glucose and triglycerides decreased significantly. LDL decreased significantly, and HDL, the good cholesterol, increased significantly. And there were no changes in creatinine and urea. So, but there was another study in which they looked at what happens once you stop the ketogenic diet. What happens to your hormones? So like Dr. Mehta said, ghrelin, it's an appetite-promoting hormone. So they found that as soon as someone stops the ketogenic diet, gets kicked out of ketosis, starts to introduce carbohydrates, your ghrelin hormone increases and your appetite increases. Then what? Then you start to gain the weight back because now you've introduced carbohydrates back into your diet. So another study, I really enjoyed reading this study because they incorporated very low-carb ketogenic diet for 20 days, first 20 days, then switched the patients to low-carb diet for another 20 days, but they also built in maintenance phase where you can see that the calories were up to 1,800. So in ketogenic phase, the calories were 976, which is the Optifast calories, the meal replacement calories that we use for meal replacement program. low carb diet phase was 1,000 calories, and protein was 100 grams in ketogenic phase, 74 in low carb diet, and 67.5 in Mediterranean phase. And the carbs, if you see that they were only 30 grams of carbs in ketogenic diet, 91 grams of carbs. So sometimes we even get scared when we see, oh my God, I've reached like 60 grams of carbohydrates in my diet, 70 grams, without even focusing so much attention on how much of that is fiber. And then 261 grams of carbohydrates in Mediterranean diet. So the Mediterranean diet was for 4 months maintenance, and then again they repeated the same thing with Mediterranean diet for 6 months. So the results show that there was an overall significant decrease in body and body fat at T1 at the end of the ketogenic diet, phase 1, and T4 again at the end of the ketogenic diet, with no signs of weight regain over the course of 1 year study. So this is very important. If someone is doing a ketogenic diet, building in that reverse dieting phase, bringing up the calories in their diet is very important. Otherwise, their body will go into starvation mode. So basically, you're teaching your body to use ketones first, and then reintroducing carbohydrates, and then reintroducing a balanced dietary pattern. So some pros and limitations. Sorry, I have a long list of limitations. I'm not going to go over them one by one. But the good thing is there is reduction in appetite. And this happens mainly because the fat and protein are higher in ketogenic diet. So that leads to increased satiety and less concomitant hypoglycemia. So when you have less rebound hypoglycemia and increased satiety, then your hunger levels basically are also lower. And that helps with decreased caloric intake, because if you're constantly hungry, your calorie intake is off the charts. But if your hunger is lower, then you're able to manage the caloric deficit for weight loss and then weight maintenance. Improved insulin sensitivity and glycemic control. And it was actually originally, this diet was originally used as a medical nutrition therapy for epilepsy, infants and children. Limitations, one of the limitations is keto flu. So if your patients are doing this diet without any supervision, they're going to experience keto flu, which is lightheadedness, nausea, constipation, and also headaches. This is mainly because of losing all the fluids as well as sodium. So when you lose a lot of fluids from your body, you become dehydrated. And where water goes, sodium goes. So that's why it's important for the patients to kind of also take in 1 to 2 grams of sodium if they are following, or salt, if they are following the ketogenic diet to bring back the levels up. As the diet adherence wanes, weight loss effect becomes similar to other diets. So it's nothing new about or unique about this diet. Like you said, if you maintain it in the long term for your life, then you achieve the health benefits. May lead to micronutrient deficiencies and negatively impact gut microbiota. So this is my favorite topic to talk about, gut microbiota, because there's such a huge link between good, like the gut microbiome diversity and your brain function. Anxiety, depression. So if we are not feeding our body with a lot of fiber, what is our good gut bacteria going to feed off of? Fat? No, they don't like fat. They like fiber. So if we are not feeding our good bacteria with fiber, then we are not promoting good gut bacteria in our gut microbiome and diversity. And micronutrient deficiencies, because a lot of these fruits, whole grains, the smart carbohydrates, as well as the whole grains, fruits, are very important for fiber, for sure, but they're also rich sources of antioxidants, because we need a lot of antioxidants if we have an inflammatory condition like diabetes, so to kind of lower the inflammation. Some of the other limitations include you need to measure ketones. So a lot of people think like, oh, I have some ketones in my urine. Okay, I'm in ketogenic or ketosis. It's not like that. It has to be supervised. Loss of muscle mass as a response to if protein intake is not adequate, because there's a lot of stress to your body if you're putting your body in ketosis, not sustainable in the long term, may lead to disordered eating. So it's important to assess if someone has a history of eating disorders or disordered eating. We should never recommend any kind of diet to them, because then it will worsen the situation. Many versions of ketogenic diet exist, some 50 grams of carbs, some 20 grams of carbs, some 60, all of that. So there's no standardized definition of how many grams of carbohydrates you should consume when you're following a ketogenic diet. Increase urge to eat. Like I said, the ghrelin hormone increases and increases the appetite if you stop the ketogenic diet. So intermittent fasting is another very popular diet that is trending. It's basically, like Dr. Gupta says, it's opposite of grazing. So if someone is a grazer, constantly eats without giving enough gap between meals and snacks, it's good for them, because then now they're kind of time-restricted feeding. So they're skipping breakfast, they're eating before 7 or 8 p.m., and then they're done. However, this diet doesn't say, like, okay, what quality of foods you should eat. It just says time-restricted. So the quality of food is in the air. If you eat a lot of saturated fat, you can still get the calories, or if you eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, you will get the calories, but a lot of nutrients as well. So it doesn't promote the quality of foods, it just talks about the type or the time-restricted feeding. Yeah.
I've heard you say that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Can you comment on that?
So Dr. Mehta actually just showed a study on The Biggest Loser following that, what was that, National Obesity Registry? Yeah.
But you want a morning meal.
Can we get the questions at the end, if you guys don't mind? Thank you. No, that was a really good question. So in terms of different types of intermittent fasting, there's a whole day fast, time-restricted feeding, and alternate day fasting. So because I'm just going to talk about one study here, it was a 12-week pilot study. They found that the weight loss in a 8-hour time-restricted feeding period, the weight loss in these participants was 2.6% compared to the control participants. And then all the other parameters like blood glucose, lipid, there was no significant difference between the control group and the time-restricted feeding group. So I'm glad you asked that question about breakfast, because if someone grew up eating breakfast and then suddenly their doctor or someone they read online and they say like, okay, I'm going to stop eating breakfast, how are you going to feel? Aren't you going to feel hangry? We don't feel that. If you've eaten breakfast for your life and you have that habit, then you start to think about food all the time. And breakfast studies have been done where breakfast eating in like children has shown to increase concentration as well as better scores in school. So it just depends. If you've never eaten breakfast, then it may be very easy for you to practice that 8-hour time-restricted feeding because you're not used to eating breakfast anyways. So some of the pros: prevents overeating and grazing all day long, promotes structured meal timings, which is very important because you want to give your digestive system a little break between meals and snacks. Improves athletic performance when practiced correctly and supervised by a sports dietitian. Contributes to weight loss in the short term. Does not promote direction around meal quality. Some of the limitations include interference with social aspect of eating. So let's say if you were practicing intermittent fasting, we've already passed that time, 7:30, quarter to 8. So it kind of, if you have to explain to people, okay, I'm following intermittent fasting if you're following really strict, and you wouldn't be eating dinner here. You would have eaten something at home and come. So it does affect that social aspect of eating. May not work for people who who have a hardwired habit of eating breakfast, may not be sustainable in the long term. So I had a patient recently who told me he intermittent fasted for 8 months. He was very successful, but what happened? When weddings came around, when gatherings came around, when he went on vacation, everything like all his efforts, he sabotaged all his efforts, and he gained weight. And now he joined the weight management program. So if you're really, really making that a habit and a lifestyle, then only it will work in the long term. Feast can trigger binge eating and decreased awareness around innate fullness and satiation cues. So based on a lot of research studies, this is what are some of the pillars of a sustainable weight loss and maintenance journey. And I preach this a lot in a lot of our weight management patients as well. So the right mindset and increased awareness. So let's say like you come to me because your doctor has told you to lose weight, but you're not in the right frame of mind. You don't have that mindset. You will listen to me. You will say, yes, sure, I'll do whatever you're saying. You'll go in your life and you'll forget about my conversation. So if you're not in the mindset and if you're not aware of a lot of consequences that can come with like increased weight gain, then you're not going to follow any diet per se. You will follow and then fall off the wagon. Calorie deficit, nutrient-dense and balanced diet, mindful eating, and exercise are very, very important to build into a holistic weight loss approach. And lastly, we don't talk so much about stress management, good quality sleep, self-care. What has happened these days? Don't we all say, oh, I'm very busy. I don't have time. I'm very busy. I'm doing this. I'm doing work things. Yeah, we all are very busy. So if we don't prioritize ourselves, then how are we going to invest any time and effort into our weight loss journey? If you are constantly staying up or having eating late night snacks and then staying up, you're not getting good sleep. So what happens is the cortisol hormone increases. It triggers more hunger. The same with if you don't manage stress with good coping strategies, then again, all your efforts for weight loss goes down. So it is very important to understand that weight loss is not just going to happen with a one specific diet. Yes, that diet can be part of the weight loss approach. However, a lot of other factors need to be addressed. So we're going to do a mindful eating activity. Who's up for it? Do you see raisins in front of you? Perfect. So it was for this activity. So I'm going to make this quick, but it cannot be very quick. So I'll try. So if you pick up the raisins and just kind of look at it, just bring all your awareness. Don't think that I'm presenting. Just focus on that raisin and think that you've starved all day and this raisin you've gotten now first time to eat. Just take a look at it and start feeling it. What do you feel? If you can let me know, like how do you feel? Is it rough? Is it soft? Soft? Okay. And what color is it? Brown. Okay. And then if you can smell it, can you tell me what are you smelling? Is it sweet, sour? Sweet? Okay. Bring all your awareness. If you need to, close your eyes. Just bring all your awareness to that raisin. Just think that you haven't eaten. I know it's late, but just think that you haven't eaten. And then now put the raisin in the mouth. And don't chew yet. Just put it in the mouth and feel it with your tongue. Okay. And just focus on it. And how are you feeling? Are you salivating? How's your stomach feeling? Just savor the sweet taste of it. Sweet and sour, very good. Thank you for contributing. And now just swallow it. So when you tried the raisin, did it bring back any memories? Some people probably hate raisins. So did it? Okay. So what? You want more? I'll get you more. Yeah. Yeah, so that's the thing, so did you feel like when you were eating dinner versus when you were paying attention to the raisin, did you have any different experience? You enjoyed it more. Thank you, Dr. Vadera. Yeah, you enjoy the food more. So what has happened is a lot of times we work through our lunch break. Who's guilty of that? I am. Who works through their lunch break? Who gets an actual lunch break? See, there we go, right? So most of us, even if we have the liberty to take lunch, we just work through it. And we feel like we are very, very busy. It's just because we are not that productive. We need to take the lunch break, get away from our work, and really savor the food because it's going to give you satiety with just 4 or 5 or maybe 15 bites. Whereas if you're ravenously hungry, I didn't even talk about the mindfulness eating scale, but if you're ravenously hungry, you're going to overeat and you're going to sabotage all your efforts towards weight loss. And obviously overeat calories too. And you want carbs and fats. We can't deny that, right? All right, so role of dietitians in sustainable weight management, individualize the nutrition program for each patient. Because each patient, like all of us, we are very unique. So there is no one size fits all. Also, a patient told me she had tried going to a diabetes center and she got meal plans from there. She never followed them because she wanted to eat something else and the meal plan included beans and lentils and she didn't like them. So she didn't follow. So when she came to me, she's like, are you going to give me a generic meal plan? And I said, no. I'm going to tailor the meal plan. So I do a full initial assessment with each patient, 60 minutes. Sometimes it's 70 minutes. You got to dig a little deeper because sometimes your eating issues go way back in your childhood. If you're overeating, sometimes it's related to your childhood, not just what is happening currently. So I do a full in-depth assessment, learn about their food preferences, and then develop the meal plan based on their likes and dislikes, but also incorporate my education. So it's a very collaborative approach. Teach patients about mindful eating strategies to help them become more connected with their body and rely on their body's hunger and fullness cues. We're not connected with our bodies. Sometimes we're not hungry and we graze because we are stressed or we just have too much work to do, we haven't eaten, multiple reasons. And then we don't know when our hunger and fullness cues are whispering in our ears, and after a while they stop whispering. And so we are very disconnected with our body. So try to help patients with mindful eating strategies because this is what is going to help them in the long run versus external cues like, oh, it's time of the day to eat, 12 o'clock, but are you hungry? Or is just because 12 and you're going to eat? Provide accountability in tangible action steps. Sometimes the action step will be eat 1 serving of vegetable for 2 weeks. If they don't like any vegetables, you start that small. Sometimes we think like we have to start really big, but it just starts very small sometimes. And individually tailor nutrition resources to support patients in achieving their goal. Because if these are generic resources, again, they're going to take it, put it in the trash can when they go home. So dietitians teach patients the how, as majority of the patients may know what to do. Everybody Google searches medical conditions, what to eat for which kind of medical condition. We can Google search everything. But the Google doesn't tailor the recommendations for your individual needs. That's where the dietitian comes into the picture because they have time to sit with you and talk to you and show you what are some of the food sources of certain kind of nutrients. So if someone is following a plant-based diet, you teach them what are some high iron foods in plant-based diet, and then how to improve the absorption of that iron by incorporating vitamin C, So things like that, those are little things, but the dietitian has the time to do that. So the eating pattern that works for you is the one that fits into your lifestyle and is sustainable. All foods fit. I really wanted to put a donuts picture here, but then I thought, okay, I'll just put a fruit and vegetable picture.
Bring on dessert.
Yeah, good timing, right? Okay, so now Dr. Mehta and I can take questions.
Thank you, Jennifer. Dr. Mehta, and you can then take questions. If you have any questions written down, our volunteers can come and collect those questions, please. Otherwise, you can also. So we'll take only like 3 or 4 questions because we have another talk after this. So and to wrap up on time. Thank you.
So you talked about meal replacement OptiFast. I have a question about that. A lot of these products, they have sucralose or low sugar products and cause a lot of bloating, change gut microbiota, and cause IBS-like symptoms. So how long do you keep them? And if somebody wants to sustain weight loss and wants to keep on one meal replacement, say for a year, it's going to change their gut biome, because liquid diet is not processed the same way as high fiber diet. What's your thoughts on that?
So the way we do meal replacement in our clinic is we only do an initial phase of 3 months. Like I said, the body needs to be in ketosis for long enough time. And then during that time, if it's partial meal replacement, I do make sure that the meal plan they get is very well balanced with a lot of fiber. So generally, the fiber will be around 25, if not more, per day, 25 grams of fiber per day, plus the meal replacement itself has about 4 grams of fiber. So, sorry?
You include
the current version of OptiFast,
Yeah.
which is available in the market. It is a complete food, and each bottle provides 4 grams of fibers, I believe. Yes, so they do get their fiber requirements, even if they are on a complete meal replacement.
Protein shake, and suddenly they are doing meal replacement. We monitor them very closely. So they have access to my Dr. Gupta and Dr. Mehta's email addresses. They let us know, and then we immediately go in and kind of provide them with recommendations. Sometimes if it's a diarrhea problem, then we recommend to bulk up the stool with Benefiber. Or also if they have, on the flip side, constipation, then magnesium supplement as well as Benefiber is recommended.
Yes, Dr. Kapoor, you're right, because the side effects that you mentioned, they are known side effects. In studies, it's shown that one of the major side effects are GI side effects with these meal replacements. But yes, as Jennifer has mentioned, we take a lot of steps to, one, ensure they get minimum side effects, and even if they do complain of things, then Jennifer here is quite experienced in managing them.
Second question on your intermittent fasting. They say that your body gets used to it after a while, so the weight loss will plateau because the body has to be shocked. If it knows, you're getting food at 12 and then you're not getting food after 8, you get used to that caloric intake between 12 and 8, and your body will require only that many calories. So you can't be on intermittent fasting for too long because the weight loss will plateau. Is that true, Dr. Gupta? I know you talk a lot about intermittent fasting.
Yes, so weight loss, as Dr. Mehta mentioned in her talk, that it does tend to, the body does tend to fight back to regain the weight. So all of those parameters do kick in, like the metabolic rate will slow down, and the body's appetite signals will increase. So there is a tendency for plateau in any sort of weight loss regimen that the patient follows. So you're saying that intermittent fasting, the body needs to get a shock again. Now, again, whether those shock tactics work in the long run, we don't know. So what I recommend is, it has to be consistent. If you are decreasing your caloric intake, you keep it consistent over the long term, keep the diet balanced. Shocking it by doing intermittent fasting for 1 day or not doing it for 2 days, and then I'm not sure, I've not seen data in the long run. We still have to wait for data, I would say. I don't know what...
Yes, I agree with Dr. Gupta. We do not have data on any of these diets, hard data, I would say. We have a lot of anecdotal data, and there are some small studies which are coming in. We do not have any long-term data. Some of the studies which have looked at these data are about just a follow-up of about a year, and that's a that's not a long duration of follow-up in an obesity world, if you ask me. But again, what this researchers have done actually, they have actually done a meta-analysis comparison of low-fat versus low-carbohydrate diet. And guess what? They found a result. They said, yes, one diet is significantly better than the other. But what's the result? Just 1 kilogram. So does it matter? No, it really does not matter what diet you're on. The only thing that matters in the long run is adherence. Adherence to any diet.
Just last couple of questions for Dr. Mehta and Jennifer. For people who are on, patients who are on meal replacement study, were they doing any specific physical exercise or were they recommended?
So it depended on the exercise, in the study they were on. For example, some of the earlier studies that I showed you, they were recommended about 150 minutes of exercise, as we usually say. But in the look ahead study, they actually had a more intensive exercise regimen which they followed. And there's a whole protocol of what the study regimen was, including sometimes they were put into groups and asked to compete against each other, or they had to log in their activity. So there were different protocols followed for different studies.
And the final question is, if partial meal replacement, should the patient be eating lunch or dinner or breakfast?
So this again is very tailored. So I have some students going to university who are on partial meal replacement, and they eat really bad breakfast. So in that case, or skip breakfast. So in that case, they drink the shake for breakfast. And I have some other patients who think like their dinner is really bad. Like that's their most triggering meal and they can't stop overeating, so they choose to do dinner for meal replacement. So it's, like I said, it's very individualized based on what their preferences are, and we kind of just make sure that the calorie intake is restricted.
Thank you.
Thank you.